What's going on, guys? Sorry for the long technical delay there. Google Hangouts is having issues. We're having issues with audio, so that sounds like YouTube was the main thing. But we're on live now, and I'm joined by St. Louis, who's on an absolute tear, current leader in the tournament player of the year. So, how are we doing today, man?
Well, not doing too bad. It's an interesting slate of games tonight. It's going to be kind of painful to break down. I think we're going to see a ton of overlap in lineups tonight, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. I'm taking it a little easy tonight on a little breather, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat, man. I think it's obviously it's still fun to play, but it seems like everything's going to be fairly obvious, and a lot of people are going to be on the same guys. So, obviously we're starting late, but I think we'll be more than able to cover pretty much everything that's going on, given there's only 6 games and there's some pretty obvious spots. Why don't you give us a weather update first, because I think that does actually play a factor in basically how we're going to construct rosters, given the limited pitching. What are your thoughts on the weather at this point?
Well, I didn't see anything that was overly concerning as far as a game getting called the last time I checked. Now, that's been a little bit, but is there a game that's kind of in danger that I don't know about? Or I think it's clear, but
Well, I think it's pretty. I think everything's going to play, and I just looked at things a little bit ago. Is that Minnesota game going to be okay for like Peralta and stuff?
yeah, that would be I guess that would be the only place that I saw that there might be an issue. Now, they tend to not. Unfortunately, with us being on Google Hangouts, it's almost impossible for me to pull up the weather map on my computer. I'll try to do it on my phone real quick and see what Minneapolis looks like. But that would obviously be the big concern. I do think they'll get that game in if there's a delay. But if there's a delay in the middle, that would obviously concern those that are looking at Peralta.
Yeah, I need to look at a map. That's the only thing. I saw it looked stronger earlier, but it's basically like anywhere from 30 to 50% for a pretty long period of time. Now it's 0% from 8 to 10, at least on weather.com. So I need to actually pull up a map as well and see what's going on there. But certainly something to monitor, especially with pitching. I think you're safe with all the hitters. It's just a matter of the pitchers getting all of their innings in a row, no delay. So I think there might be a small concern there if you're considering Peralta, but certainly nothing that looks too dangerous, and certainly something to monitor up until game time. So with that, why don't you talk about some pitchers? Give me some. I have no idea what's going on. I know Waka is one of the guys who's up there, but is there anyone else that you like at pitcher?
Yeah, the map looks okay in Minneapolis right now. I wouldn't be too concerned if I was on those guys. Waka's the number one guy on the board, but I don't know as though I'd be overly heavy on him tonight. He depends a lot on the strikeout, and the Royals, in general, don't strike out a ton, and I think that limits Waka's upside. Plus, they work a lot of counts, and he always has a tendency to throw a ton of pitches. I mean, he had a game against the Mets earlier this year where he struck out like 9 of his first 10 outs or something like that, but he wasn't even able to get through 5 innings because he threw 100 or so pitches in like 4 2/3 innings. So the matchup against the Royals with him actually worries me a little bit tonight. And with the price tag, I don't think I'd be on him a whole lot. To be honest, if you look at the lineups in the Mets-Cubs game, they're atrocious. And the wind is blowing in at Wrigley tonight. So I think you're safe going down to either a guy like Jacob deGrom or even a guy like Travis Wood. Neither are glamorous names. deGrom has actually been very good since they brought him up. Has shown really good stuff and a high strikeout rate. So he's actually the guy I'm targeting, especially on sites like FanDuel where he's still a bit underpriced. DraftKings has him at 9,500, so a bit more steep for him there. But I do think he's in play, and a guy that I think will be highly owned tonight, but would be even more highly owned if people knew more about him. A lot of people will just look at a rookie that's 9,500 and say no thanks. But I think he's in play. I think Travis Wood's in play on the other side of it. You talked about Peralta. I think he's probably the third guy I would look at tonight. One word of caution, if you're planning on using Peralta, he looked like he was really struggling through a back injury in his last start. It was actually the night of the DraftKings Showcase Finals, and I had him, so I was concerned that he was going to get pulled out of that game, and he did not look the same after he tweaked whatever was bothering him. Now, he's had a full 5 days. It's possible that it's all better by now, but you never know. So it's just a mild concern. if you're going after Peralta tonight. And after that, I mean, it pretty much stinks. You can get rid of the Baltimore, Texas pitchers. You can get rid of Brad Peacock. I mean, maybe Tyler Skaggs in a GPP against Houston, but they're hitting it much better right now. And I'm not touching Ventura in his first start back after his injury. It doesn't. I don't know if they're being overly careful with him or not, but he just didn't look right his last 2 times out. It's not that I'm targeting the Cardinals' offense by any means because they're a hot mess right now, but I just think Ventura is too risky tonight. So basically, for me, it's DeGrom, Wood, and Peralta, and that's not exactly a ringing trio of pitchers.
Yeah, I mean it's just marginal across the board. I think Waka still has the upside. I mean, I know Kansas City they don't just not strike out, but I think they're last in the league in strikeouts versus right-handers. So that certainly limits some of the upside for Waka. But he's a guy with such elite stuff that I still think he can get the Ks. Obviously, he's a guy that hasn't gone as deep into games as you want for guys that you're going to pay up like that for. But on a night where pitching is just such trash, I still think there's merit to taking him. I agree with you on the Mets game. I think there's value there. Peralta, there's a concern with injury. Same with Ventura, like you mentioned. So it's pretty much just crap, to be honest. It's like on Draft Street, this might be the perfect night to roll out a reliever. You know what I mean? It's like the pitching's just so marginal today, and there are some really good bats. So it's one of those spots where I just don't feel too comfortable with pitchers, and that's something I always like to do in cash games is make sure, even if I have to pay up, that I get someone that I'm comfortable with as a pitcher. So pretty weird day overall from a pitching standpoint. I'm not happy about really anything. Take any one of the guys that Cards mentioned. I think you're okay. Peralta probably has the most risk, and then you're just really gambling on the Mets and the Cubs game. So with that, let's at least move to something a little bit more cheery. Hitting. There's some bats tonight, actually. There's some high over-unders. We got the Rockies at home with Arizona, so that's going to be a high-scoring game, and we have some other really high team totals. So we'll start at catcher. Montero had a huge game last night. A lot of people were on him. I think he's number 1 by a good margin again tonight. If you're not taking him, where are you going, and do you agree that he's number 1?
Yeah, I would certainly agree that he was number 1. In GPPs last night, I played the known ownership percentage. I actually completely faded the Rockies and the A's last night in GPPs. And talk about, a nervous wreck, just hoping that those teams didn't put up runs. And then Cespedes ended up hitting 2 homers. The Rockies, came back after a slow start and got some runs. Now, luckily on DraftKings, I stacked Arizona, and they got 11 runs the last 2 innings. So it ended up working out quite well, but it was certainly a risky fade, and on a 6-game night, I wouldn't recommend, fading that game in Coors again. As much as I like to take a risk when I know guys are going to be highly owned, there's simply not a lot to pivot to tonight. It's not like you can pivot to 2 aces pitching. So you're either stuck, if you are dead set on not taking a lot of hitters from the Rockies game as a contrarian play, you're basically set on Baltimore and Texas, which is fine. But in Baltimore and Texas, you're not going to find a catcher. So, Montero is probably the guy for me. I think Rosario is in play as well. I'm pretty sure he's in the lineup. I don't have that pulled up right now. If you want,
he's been batting 6th.
Yeah. So if you want a total punt, Caleb Joseph for the Orioles has. He's been decent the last couple nights, and he's basically, the 22 to 2,500 range on the big 2 sites, DraftKings and FanDuel. So I don't mind him as a total punt, but I think you're going to see 80% of the people on Montero and Rosario, and I would put Montero ahead simply because he's back cleanup and he's generally a little bit cheaper.
Yep, I mean that's the analysis. Montero's going to be the most heavily owned guy. I like him for cash games. I think it's the right play. For tournaments, you can go even contrarian. I guess it's not really that contrarian. I think people will be on the same guys. Rosario obviously has huge power in Colorado, so it's one of those nights where there's not many options. You mentioned Joseph, certainly a punt play if you need it, but there's just not that much. I mean, you can have a really well-balanced lineup with how cheap pitching is tonight, and you don't need to really punt any position. So moving to first base, I think there's 2 options. I mean, this is just a ridiculous day for analysis. There's, in my mind, 2 viable options. There's Goldschmidt and there's Chris Davis. Certainly there's other options if you want to go contrarian, but those are the 2 options I think make by far the most sense. Who do you have number one today, Cards?
I'd give Davis the edge because he's cheaper everywhere. Colby Lewis really struggles with left-handed bats, and when Chris Davis gets hot, I mean, he can have a three-homer night. So especially in GPPs, he homered last night. He's looking a little better at the plate, not striking out quite as much the past couple games, other than when they faced left-handers. So I give Davis the edge because he's cheaper. If they were the same price, I'd probably give Goldschmidt the edge. But yeah, I like both of those guys. I do think Pujols is in play in a GPP if you do want to play the fade card there, especially on FanDuel where he's a little bit cheaper. And as somebody mentioned Eric Campbell earlier for the Mets. He is batting cleanup tonight. The Mets lineup is a disaster tonight. They've got Andrew Brown hitting fifth, Wilmer Flores batting sixth, Tejada seventh. So, that's part of the reason why I like Travis Wood. I'm not just on those Mets bats simply because they're in there and they've got a, Campbell batting cleanup. That just puts me on Travis Wood more than it does the Mets bats. So I think it's one of those three, and I think, like you mentioned, Davis and Goldschmidt at the top.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those three too, and I would give the edge to Davis based on value, but I do think Goldschmidt, even though he's not facing a lefty, he just has such a huge advantage at Coors Field. So both are in great spots and both have huge upside. And Pujols, like you said, is a great kind of move, and I think a lot of people will be on the Angels in general. That's the other way. If you don't want to play the Coors Field card, Angels is certainly the way to pivot to. They have a really high team total, so have no problem with basically anyone in that lineup. Let's move to second base. Second base is interesting. I think there's a couple guys. Kendrick, staying along the Angels theme, is really cheap on some sites. A lot of people on Altuve today is the number one second baseman, which I have no problem with. I think Aaron Hill is also in play. What are your thoughts on those guys, and how would you rank the position?
Yeah, I think Altuve is a guy a lot of people are going to be on. Don't love his price on a lot of sites. I actually prefer Kendrick tonight. And I'm a big Altuve guy in general, but Kendrick on FanDuel is just too cheap. I think he's 25 or 2,600 over there. I don't know, too cheap. Maybe 27 the max. I think he was 27 last night and might have come down to 25 today. That's just too cheap for Howie Kendrick. With Hamilton back and Pujols and Hamilton hitting in front of him, batting fifth. I know he struggled a bit of late, but Brad Peacock's not that good. So Kendrick's my guy at second base tonight. Don't mind Aaron Hill kind of as another option right there with Altuve. If you want to go a little bit different, if you really need to save on a site like DraftKings, there's two ways you can go kind of the cheap route. The first, this will be my only homer pick today. I'm not going to pick too many Cardinals against Giordano Ventura, but Colton Wong's actually looked pretty good against righties lately. Hit a grand slam off James Shields the other night. And on places where he's cheap, DraftKings 3,500, that's about 1K below the other top guys that we talked about. Don't mind him as a play, especially for GPPs tonight, or if you're just trying to save some salary. And then the second is Jonathan Scope for the Orioles. I mentioned that Colby Lewis tends to struggle with left-handers, but I think he's just going to struggle in general at home. So not afraid to target Orioles batting from the other side of the plate as well. Scope is batting, I believe, behind, I think he said seventh tonight behind Chris Davis and J.J. Hardy. But he's been hitting the ball fairly well of late, and the Orioles as a team have picked up their offense the last week or so. So I don't mind him as a punt play also.
Okay, I think all those guys are viable options. I agree with you on Kendrick on FanDuel in particular. Just too cheap. I think he's really in a great spot. Aaron Hill, I think, is another guy who's in a really good spot overall, just with the power bump that he gets and facing a weak right-handed pitcher. The other thing to notice is the Rockies' bullpen is pretty depleted at this point. They've just been getting crushed lately, and all those relievers are terrible. So I think any of the Arizona guys are going to get an even bigger bump if they can get ahead on Nicasio, because they could get out of hand early, and they don't have any of their really good not that they have good relievers, but they're kind of worn down already. So
do you have any faith in Nicasio at all as a Rockies fan? I mean, it seems like every now and again he'll just put together a gem, even at home. You just throw out a random, complete game with one run every now and again.
He's nice sometimes. The only Rocky, I think De La Rosa has potential to be a good pitcher. He's shown to be a good pitcher, in the past. This year he's struggling. Lyle says there's a little bit of excitement, but to be honest, the only excitement we really have is the two young guys who are about to come up in the minors. We almost traded you Tulowitzki. How funny would that be, Cards? Speaking of which, we almost traded you guys Tulowitzki for some of the minor league pitching that the Cards have. I mean, we got some
Yeah,
time here. I
I
mean, do you think
wanted
that?
that.
You
I
talked about
wanted
it.
that to get done. It was in maybe December or January. The rumblings were fairly strong for a couple weeks. Even the rumors were going around St. Louis a little bit. And the Cardinals have not had a middle infielder that can really hit for a long time. I mean, it's been a long time since the Cardinals have had a second baseman or a shortstop that's been known for the bat. I mean, ever since I started following them really close, which would have been like '96, that was the last year of Ozzie Smith, and so then it became Royce Clayton at shortstop. And it's just been a revolving door, frankly, of crap ever since Ozzie Smith left. David Eckstein was a warrior, and that's fine, and he was a gamer, a World Series MVP, but he was a 290 hitter that hit 2 home runs a year. So I was really excited that they were at least talking about getting a middle of the order, middle infielder that can hit. So, and with the season that Tulowitzki's having, I mean, it's just I don't know. I wish they would have made it happen, but obviously maybe his numbers won't be quite as good playing away from Coors Field. But the Cardinals desperately need some offense, and it's finally, I think, catching up to them that they just haven't had the production at certain spots that they need, even center field. Oscar Taveras is going to be a nice player for a long time. Whether he's fully ready yet, I don't know. But the rolling combination of John Jay and Peter Borges isn't good enough out there either. So you've got a second base position, a shortstop position, and a center field position that you just haven't gotten much production from. Center field basically since Jim Edmonds left. So that's just three holes there. And I think Colton Wong would be fine, but he's still young. And it'd be nice to see him get a shortstop that can hit. Nothing against Peralta, but he's not going to hit for average either.
Yeah, no, totally. And it would have been an interesting trade. Obviously, I'm a huge Tulo fan. That goes without being said. But it would have been interesting. The Cardinals do have a bunch of pitching, and that's an asset that they'll be able to utilize at some point. I imagine you guys will make a move at the deadline if the bats don't come around to fill some of those holes. You guys just have so much depth. One thing I'll comment on shortstop, there's one guy I kind of like that you guys have had at shortstop, and that's Rafael Furcal. But this year, he was potentially going to play, and this was his last year before he got hurt, or was that last year? I'm trying to remember when.
It's been like the last 2 or 3 years. He was good with the Cardinals. Like, when they traded for him, he was good for the rest of that season and that run that they had there, and then the injuries just started, and they never got a real full year out of him. So yeah, he's probably the best they've had since.
And they didn't even have him for a full season,
right?
So it doesn't really count. Yeah,
he was good in the playoff run a few years back.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're going to be good, that's the right time to do it as a Cardinals fan. And I certainly don't feel too bad for you as a Cardinals fan. You guys have had quite a bit of success, and I think it's going to sustain. I think did ESPN or someone came out that St. Louis is the best organization in baseball, and I think that you could argue that for a lot of reasons. So.
It's phenomenal the way they do it from the draft to I read a piece it might have been a month ago or so of players on the 40-man roster of all the MLB teams. It was probably at the end of last season, and I think there was 3 teams tied for second with 15 players on their roster that were drafted and developed through that team system and still on the 40-man roster. So second place was like 3 teams with 15, and the Cardinals had 25. So they were 10 ahead of everybody else. And when you can get that, when you can develop those young pitchers, like the Michael Wacha's making what, 500,000 right now. Yeah, that's just. I mean, a pitcher like that goes for what, 15 or 16 million a year on the open market. So being able to develop that talent through their system has been key to their success, and they need to keep that up because it's not like St. Louis is the biggest market. So I'm excited for the draft tonight. I will keep my eyes on that, and even though we won't see a lot of those guys for 3 or 4 years, it's still fun to see where the big names end up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, while we're on that topic, we'll dive into the rest of the picks here, but we do have a lot of good TV going on. We have the draft tonight, we have some baseball games, and we have the finals. We were talking a little bit about it. You think that the Heat are going to win this final series?
I don't want them to win, but I think they're going to. I don't know. I don't see them beating LeBron, but I hope the Spurs win, but I think the Heat will take it down. It should be a good series, though.
Yeah, I'm excited for the series. I definitely am on the Heat, but it seems like a lot of people are on the Spurs, so it's going to be interesting. There's still obviously all the people back in the Heat, but it's interesting to see kind of where the experts think this is going to go. Certainly, it's going to be an amazing series. I don't think much has changed from last year, so it's going to be fun to see how that breaks down. Shortstop, real quick. I got Tulowitzki. You got anyone else?
Tulowitzki is still way too cheap on FanDuel, so
Oh
he's
man.
kind of a must over there.
Yeah.
Basically a free slot. But I'll go back to the well. If you want to go to the other side of that game, I do like Owings. In the first game of that series, he did have a double, a triple, and a home run, and then got Kirk Gibson last night for Didi Gregorius, who then hit a home run. And so it's back to Owings tonight. There's no rhyme or reason to the Diamondbacks lineups other than to say that Owings is in there tonight and batting second. So I really like him if you're pivoting down from Tulowitzki or on DraftKings where he's quite a bit cheaper. Those are really the only two guys I'm playing. I mean, you really can't argue for anybody that's close to Tulowitzki in price. And then the lower options, they just don't grab me tonight. Maybe Elvis Andrus if you want to go cheap on FanDuel. Not a place I'm going. I'm just trying to throw another name out there because
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm certainly not going to give another name because, I keep it very simple at shortstop. And so, what's funny, too, is, I make all these jokes about it and whatnot, and certainly I've even played Tulowitzki where doesn't necessarily make the most sense, and he's just been hot. It's going to be interesting to see how long he stays kind of on this streak. Obviously, injuries are always an issue with him, but at home, it's just one of those situations, kind of like Kevin Durant in basketball this year. At certain points, doesn't really matter how expensive they are. You're just getting so much production at a spot, and relative to anyone else, you're in a much better position most of the time taking that player. So I think Tulowitzki is going to continue to be that way as long as he stays healthy and kind of in this groove. Only at home though, so you kind of have to mind. It's tough as a big Tulowitzki fan. I can never play him on the road, really ever, and it's harder to play him even at the end of homestands when they start to bump up his price. So take advantage while you still can. He's expensive on a lot of sites, but on FanDuel, he's basically a must-play. Andrews, like you mentioned, I think is an option. I can't really even think of anyone else to throw out there. I mean, J.J. Hardy sucks. He's not even facing a lefty right now. I just don't have anyone else. I mean, if you were in a punt the position, is there anyone? I mean, would you go to Segura or would you go maybe to Danny Santana, who's just been a big disappointment? How would you handle if you didn't want to play like Andrews, Owings, or Tulowitzki?
To be honest, I don't think I'd go any lower than Owings. I just don't see anybody down there that's worth it.
Okay, so we're on the same page. All right, let's go to third base. Third base, I think Beltre is going to be the one who's most heavily used tonight, given that he had 2 home runs. A lot of recency bias, and I guess we can dovetail into this a little bit. I know you're really good at kind of figuring out where you think people are going to be, where the crowd's going to be, and then going a little bit different direction in tournaments. I think recency bias is like the biggest indicator of what people are going to do on a given night. So I think everyone's going to be on Beltre. Obviously, it's a short night, so I think they'd be on him anyways. But because of his light night last night, I think everybody's going to be on him. So talk to me about recency bias and then third base and Adrian Beltre.
Yeah, I think it's a big thing. Starters coming off poor starts, starters coming off good starts. 5 days later, you still see it a little bit where guys tend to be over or under owned based on what they did the last time out. Especially if a guy was really highly owned and sucked. The next start, I mean, it's almost always a guarantee that he's going to be under owned, depending on the matchup. I mean, obviously this is a generalization, but same thing with the bats, only we get it the very next night, so it tends to play in a little bit more. I was actually on Beltre quite a bit last night as my pivot from Donaldson because, as I mentioned, I wasn't on the A's. So that worked out, and I don't know. I mean, to me, if you're not going with Beltre, you go with Manny Machado, and I can't ever get Manny Machado right. I'm like 0 for 20 figuring out Manny Machado this year. I don't take him, he hits a grand slam. I take him, he goes 0 for 4 or 1 for 5, even on the days the Orioles go off. I simply cannot predict when Manny Machado is going to do well. I always get it wrong. So he's the guy I'd pivot to if I wasn't on Beltre tonight, which probably means that you should just stay on Beltre because I'll put Machado on some teams and take one for the club there. Huh. I just can't get him right. I mean, Aramis Ramirez is back from the DL. He's still cheap on a few sites. He could be an option. Don't forget, I mean, the Brewers might be a decent contrarian play tonight because Kevin Correa isn't any good either.
Yep. No, I totally agree with that. I think the Brewers are a sneaky stack. I mean, it's one of those nights that's very straightforward. There's some big offenses though, so wouldn't surprise me to see Colorado, Arizona, the Orioles, Rangers, even Milwaukee be the top scoring offenses like you mentioned. Agree with you on everything at third base. I think it's pretty straightforward. Beltre will be by far the most heavily owned. If you want to pivot, I think Machado is probably the most sensible option. Outside of Prado, I think Prado's another guy that's definitely worth considering using. Nicasio's, pretty good matchup. It's not, optimal for him, but it's still a course field, so I think he's in a good spot overall. So I think you'll basically see people on Prado, Beltre, and then a little bit of Machado. So we're pretty much on the same page. Outfield, this is the one spot where I think there's a lot of options, and we'll see a little bit of variance in what people do. Who's your top option tonight? You got Mike Trout at the top coming back, or who would you say is the number one overall guy?
I don't think I'm going to put Trout up there simply because he hasn't. He just, bless you, he hasn't looked right. Even when he's been playing. So I just don't think we can go back to the well. There's too many other guys tonight. To be honest, I really like Carlos Gomez. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the matchup with Correa, but he's been quietly the highest producing outfielder this year, not named Nelson Cruz. I don't think I'm going to pay up for Cruz as a righty with that salary against Colby Lewis. I'd probably rather go down to a guy like Adam Jones tonight, or even Markakis with the way that Colby Lewis struggles with left-handed batters. The knock against Markakis is he really doesn't have any power. He has homered in this series, but it's not something you can count on from him. So Gomez is probably my top guy. I mean, he's been hitting the ball much better than Brian Braun of late. I'm on both of them a good bit, but I like Gomez, especially on sites where he's a little bit cheaper. Chu is another guy from that Baltimore-Texas game. If you're not on Beltre to get some exposure to Texas, I think Chu's a solid option. Hasn't been doing a whole lot lately, but that's caused a nice little $400 to $500 dip in his price on FanDuel and DraftKings. And Tillman is also a pitcher that's prone to giving up, getting knocked around from time to time. So I think you'll see some people on Chu and even Alex Rios. Let's see. I was going to look for some punt options again. You've got guys for the Mets that are hitting randomly in the middle of the order tonight. I don't know. Are they guys you can trust? Can we trust those guys from the Mets? I mean, I'd much rather, I guess, go for one of the Arizona cheap outfielders at Coors Field tonight and take a stab on one of those. I actually really like Gerardo Parra tonight too.
Oh yeah.
And the Rockies, the Rockies outfielders clearly in play. I mean, I didn't intentionally omit them, but you'll see a lot of people on Blackman. Drew Stubbs is starting and batting second tonight. He hasn't played in a while. Is he a guy you're on tonight? I never take Drew Stubbs a whole lot, but when he's batting second ahead of Tulowitzki, he's going to get pitches to hit.
Yeah, I really like Stubbs versus lefties, and he's someone I've actually played a lot this year. He got really hot there when Kadire went out. It was kind of towards the end of the stretch when Kadire was out that he got really hot, especially versus lefties. I like him, but the one issue is Arroyo has been really good against right-handed batters, so not quite as high on him. I definitely like Dickerson more than him for just slightly more expensive on some sites. Really depends on the pricing, where you're going to go. In terms of the outfielders, though, I think you hit everyone that I'm on. I like Chu a lot for the discounted price. I still think there's a lot of value in him batting leadoff. I think Texas can put up a lot of runs today. I think all the Angels outfielders are in place. Certainly Trout, not the top outfielder, and he's priced like it, but I still think he's a nice play, and people might not be on him as much as they normally are. But I agree with you. He hasn't looked completely right. A guy that I love is Josh Hamilton. I think everyone's pretty much on Josh Hamilton at this point. It's interesting. Do you think Josh Hamilton is going to play better just without the pressure? I felt like he had so much pressure last year, and it feels like the pressure might finally kind of be off him. What are your thoughts there?
I think a little bit. He's always been streaky, so it's going to make him tough to peg from a DFS perspective. But certainly I think he'll have a better second half than kind of he did last year, where it seemed like he was, striking out basically every time he came up, especially against a left-handed pitcher. So, I mean, there's upside there, certainly. If I was in a season-long league, this would kind of be the time where I consider, especially as if he has a couple of other poor games, pulling the trigger on a buy low deal for him. I don't play any season long anymore, but if anybody's out there that does, I think he can be a solid outfielder. I still don't think he should be priced where he is on a lot of sites. I think the
Yeah.
name factor kind of has him a little bit overpriced. But I think a lot of people will still be on him tonight with the matchup against Peacock and the fact that he could come out and hit 2 homers. And outfield is a spot where you can put yourself over the top tonight because there's so many options that guys in the outfield, although good options, are going to be maybe 15 to 25% owned as opposed to guys like Beltre and Tulowitzki who might be 50% or more.
Yeah. And someone, maybe I misread a stat somewhere, but I did read Arroyo. I had this written down, didn't have the highest, and someone just said 404. I'll pull that up here again. I'm not sure where you're getting. We might have a conflicting data there, but even though I'm not as high on the right-handed bats for the Rockies, I still like them. I'm playing Tulo, obviously, and I think all the Rockies players are certainly in play. Arroyo's not a good pitcher overall. They're still one of the highest team totals. So don't misinterpret that. I'm still really high on them. I'm not trying to, beat down my Rockies by any means. I think we covered everything there, guys. Feel free to fire in some questions. Cards, we got some questions for you just in general. What are your thoughts on kind of the rest of baseball season? I know you came in strong. Obviously had a huge April, playing the tournaments and stuff. And I think there's a lot of value in really hammering April and May from a baseball perspective. But now we're kind of getting into, I wouldn't say it's the dog days, but we're getting into the time of the year where, it's more veterans playing. There's a lot of people who kind of understand baseball going on right now. And I think there's some adjustments potentially to be made since there's less volume sometimes out there. What are your thoughts on kind of attacking the rest of baseball season? And do you plan on focusing on tournaments like you have been the rest of the way, or do you think you'll incorporate cash games as well?
I might switch over a little bit. The tournaments have been running well for me. April, FanDuel was the site that I was kind of having the most success on, and then May was kind of DraftKings month, and I actually posted on the forums about this. If you're a multi-site player, there will be times where the pricing just grabs you on one site more so than the other, and you just happen for whatever reason to run hotter on one site versus others that you might play on. And there's a lot of merit into shifting around your action based on the site that you're currently feeling the most comfortable with. It's easier because that site tends to be the one where you end up accumulating a larger bankroll because you've been winning over there. And so you naturally shift more of your action over there. But, there's people that were struggling with that. Why am I winning on DraftKings and not winning on FanDuel? It is a good, point to question yourself when that's happening. But I just tend to kind of shift my action during the times that is happening. So, maybe I'll go 70% DraftKings and 30% other sites when I'm running good on DraftKings. And then, if I start to lean more towards doing well on FanDuel, go play a little bit more over there for a while. And just kind of it ebbs and flows for me. It's hard to explain. I don't really have any set. A lot of it is instinct with where I'm going to play on a specific night, or obviously, if there's overlay or something. But that's kind of how I approach it. So if I go through a spell where I'm, say, running dry on DraftKings and FanDuel for tournaments for a while, I'll play more cash games. It all depends on kind of how it's working. And so far, April I was hot on FanDuel for tournaments. In May I was running good on DraftKings. So I've still kind of stuck to that for the most part. Definitely played a lot less cash games than I have in years past. Now for football, I'm more of a cash game player, just because there's a little bit less variance, and I think cash games are more predictable week to week than they are day to day in baseball. But for now, I'm still going to focus on tournaments for the most part, except on nights like this. Nights like this are nights where I wouldn't mind playing some cash games because even though it's a skill-based game in the long run, I think tournament wins tonight, there's going to be so much overlap that I think the tournaments tonight are going to come down to the one player that somebody has that everyone else doesn't have that hits 2 home runs or something like that.
Yeah, no, and I certainly agree with that. And I think that you bring up a lot of good points. And obviously, it's interesting. McJester had a lot of his success towards the dog days of basketball as a tournament player. So it's I think people are more on to tournaments than they've been in the past coming into baseball. But I think baseball leads itself to tournaments more than other sports, and certainly a lot of guys, most importantly, like yourself, who really took advantage of that. I think that there's going to be continued value in it as well. There's the competition definitely gets, and this is for all you guys out there too. The games do get a little bit tougher here in the middle of summer because a lot of the guys who are just coming on playing for the first time don't know what they're doing. They might be doing other things at this point in the summer, might have, taken a couple bad beats and be done with it. So don't get discouraged, and definitely I think there's a lot of merit to what Card says. I think you can basically kind of mix around your action, mix around your game types, and kind of switch things up. If you're, playing all tournaments, trying to think outside the box, it might make sense to go back to playing cash games and just kind of doing that, figuring out what plays would make the most sense. Vice versa, if you're struggling with cash games a little bit, maybe try some different things with tournaments. So just kind of mix it up and sometimes.
Yeah, and there's another point to make here, and I'm not saying this from a self-serving perspective or anything like that, but if you focus solely on tournaments for baseball, it can be hard. It can be hard on you, personally, because the other night, that big DraftKings tournament, which obviously I multi-entered a lot, I had it was the night that Kyle Seager went nuts, and I had two pitchers that had finished their games and pitched really well, and I had a Pirate stack, and of course they're on the West Coast, didn't play till 9 o'clock, and they had scored 4 runs fairly early, and I mean it was almost midnight here, and I fell asleep. Woke up about an hour and a half later and saw that the Pirates got 3 in the 7th and 3 in the 8th, and they had 10 runs. Refreshed the DraftKings page, and I was in 4th place in that huge perfect game tournament that they had. And there was 3 people tied for the lead, and I was only like 3 points behind them going into the 9th inning, and they got a guy to second base. So basically all they needed to do was bring that guy home for me to win that tournament. And that's a $100,000 tournament. They ended up not getting the run home, so I finished 4th, which, and with all the entries I put in, I basically eked out a small profit. Now, a small profit versus $100,000, that's a big difference. And you and I have talked about this in the past, that the variance from one thing to another. No, you had a putt in PGA cost you first place in the big DraftKings tournament a couple weeks ago. It's insane, the swings that you can experience if you're a heavy tournament player. And that's just something that you need to keep in mind if you're going to go heavy with that. In terms of how much of your bankroll you put into play, and just from an emotional perspective, it's draining at times.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that there's a lot of good stuff there. And, just it comes with the territory. There's a lot of variance in this stuff, and it's easy to get really confident when things are going well, and it's really easy to get really down on yourself when things aren't going well. So I think being level-headed and just kind of knowing that this is a really long summer. There's a lot of different things going on, and there's going to be a lot of baseball. So just make sure you're kind of playing it for the long run more than anything. I think it's the best piece of advice that I could give. Just make sure you're setting yourself up to be sustainable, and setting yourself up so that you can have a good time with it too. I mean, that's obviously everyone wants to make money, but a big part of this too is just having fun with it. So we're running out of time here. We'll get one question since we didn't get too much going on here. I saw a couple questions here. Pujols Wong, Machado, Gomez, or Davis, Altuve, Beltran, Jones. So a really long one to kind of go with it. I'll give it to you one more time. Pujols Wong, Machado, Gomez, or Davis, Altuve, Beltran, Jones.
I think the second group is a little bit better.
I think the second group is significantly better. So good luck there. Any last words, Cards?
No, good luck tonight, everybody. I know we got started late and spent a little less time on the analysis than normal, but I promise everybody that's on my lineups tonight, we gave out during the show. It's just with only 6 games and some obvious plays, really not a ton to break down tonight. So, good luck out there tonight, and we'll be back at you tomorrow.
Yeah, no, we'll be back at tomorrow where there'll be a lot going on, a lot of industry stuff. Tonight's kind of a quieter night in the DFS industry, and like Card said, there's really, in my opinion, there's 2 or 3 guys at pretty much every position with the exception of outfield where there's certainly more options, but it's a pretty straightforward night, and I think we'll see some of these guys with similar lineups at the top. So good luck to everybody, and we'll catch you guys here soon.